right, so our next artwork here is the painted elk hide. Our artist here is Kotsiko. The European name is Kotsikoti, that's why it's in parentheses, but that's because they couldn't pronounce it, which at least I try when I can't pronounce things, right? So Kotsiko, our culture here is Eastern Shoshone. Our location is Wind River Reservation, Wyoming. So the reservation system has been put into place at this point of the Americas. So there's sequestered land specific to different tribes that has different rules and regulations as a sort of half-baked apology for wiping out, the entire indigenous population, which is great. But it's something. Our date is 1890 to 1900, so we're a little bit more modern, and our media is painted elk hide. Whoa, the media and the title match. That's easier to remember. So an elk is a deer-like animal that's in this region, and they would have been hunted, and then all parts of the animal used. The hide would be stripped off of the animal carcass, sheared, and then tanned, and then going through that process. So it was a canvas for painting and weaving, etc. So hides were used, every part of the animal used. When we're looking at the Eastern Shoshone, location-wise, they're based around Wyoming, kind of where Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming meet. They are a plains culture, so the geography there is very kind of these flatlands. My human geo people, you guys can, start thinking all about the geography of that region. But it's pretty flat, kind of dry, has rainy seasons, a little bit more mild temperature than the extremes of like our Canadian piece. So keeping that in mind geography-wise. Some key things that come from Eastern Shoshone that are a little bit more like popular, I guess. People kind of know it a little bit more. Number one, horses. So the connection between indigenous people and horses is explored in media. It's usually showcasing the plains cultures or like the Eastern Shoshone. So like Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron movie, I watched a ton as a kid. That's kind of that idea. So this is horse culture. Horse is very important for speed, mobility. It helps with hunting, it helps with movement, and it helps kind of expand their territories in the region. Horses are strong, powerful animals. Gonna totally butcher the name because I forgot to look it up, but one of the main chiefs of the Shoshone, the Eastern Shoshone chief was Shaki. Sorry. Super respected leader, very fierce warrior. I bring him up because he's such a powerful figure for the Shoshone in even the eyes of the US government, which that's contentious, that when he died in 1900, he received full military honors. So that was like a big moment to acknowledge an indigenous person, the work they did in that government setting in which a lot of the American government was kind of underplaying their role historically in the decline of the indigenous population. So this was a time period where it started to kind of shift. Another prominent figure that comes from the Shoshone is Sacagawea. So if you watch Night at the Museum or you remember anything about the Lewis and Clark expedition, Sacagawea was a major role in that story. She's really fascinating. She was actually stolen from her people, the Lemhi Shoshone people, when she was super young, kind of forced to marry this French guy. And then because she had the language of the Shoshone, but also the language of the French and the European influence, she was able to become an interpreter for Lewis and Clark as they did their expeditions across the plains. So she's a really interesting figure, more interesting than Lewis and Clark. And then if you've ever heard of the term powwow, this is a contentious word that has been kind of reclaimed. The Shoshone have these big ceremonies that ended up like Europeans didn't understand, kind of what they're looking at because they're coming in with God, gold, and glory on the mind. And powwow was a term for a medicine man, but they took that and started using that as a term for like the ceremonies, and then it got trickled down into just being like a gathering of people, and then the term powwow started just using for generic things. So it's a weird term. So I linked an interesting article about its history, because especially recently, tribes like the Shoshone, who use these traditionally like big ceremonious scenes that people ended up calling powwows, they're starting to use that term powwow to help kind of support indigenous culture. It's a complicated one, so that's why I linked that there. So if you're interested in that conversation, check that out. So a lot of background there, but getting into our artwork here, we're looking at River Reservation right here, and then we can see that painted elk hide, especially around the edges, how it was stretched and pulled and tanned, and then all the painted details, very beautifully stylized, bright and colorful. You could see figures, you could see animals. The sense of space is really fascinating because there is movement, there is positive and negative space, but it's a little bit more chaotic than what we've been looking at in the other indigenous art, where it's very controlled, like the bandolier bag, like very specific, patterned, finite, where this is a lot more organic in its composition, kind of spread out, moving with the hide itself, but not emphasizing the hide. It's almost feels like a doodle page, but it's all very purposeful in its depiction. And then some close-ups, so you could see that stylization in play. People do have like the tiny, tiny details, but a lot of our animals were seen in profile. And you could see an interesting thing, like think back to way back in the caves of Lascaux with our the Hall of Bulls, where they had the twisted composite view because they wanted to show off the horns. Here we have this buffalo, and that is a side profile. You don't see both horns. There is some twisting though. Look at that nose. But it's not that same full composite view that we saw in the caves. Visually, when we're looking at this, the pigments here are all natural pigments, so they were from plants and minerals. They would have been grounded up to make the color. Red ochre, speaking of caves of Lascaux, right? So red ochre would have been an important one. Chalk. Additional paints and dyes would have come from trading. Again, at this point, Europe is fully established itself. We have the United States of America in existence, and that spreading westward has already started happening or has happened. They keep going. Like, states are not all fully settled in yet, but it's just about there at this point. Interesting thing, this is a combination of freehand penciling and stenciling. So a stencil is where you have like a pre-cut negative space of the image, and then you would paint in that space. So say like the bulls, for example, where you'd have that cut out, you roll the paint on top or slap the paint on with whatever brushes you're using, remove the stencil, and now you have that bull looking exactly the same as the next bull and the next bull and the next bull. But there is that combo of using that as well as hand painting all of the extra details. Very, very bright, bold colors. So yes, they're natural pigments, but those yellows are highly saturated. The blues are highly saturated. Those reds are like really like carmelian, kind of beautiful crimson red, cute. There's the bright pinks, there's the greens, there's a lot of colors here, and the colors have really stuck onto the elk hide still to this day. We have very simplified shapes, right? So there's some abstractions. If you're looking at these triangles and you're trying to figure out what that is, those are teepees, potentially. Believe that they are teepees. So there is some stylization that is happening. We do see some buffalo hunting on the outer edges of the scene. So there's like two scenes going on. The horses, they're chasing after the buffalo. Buffalo, really important to Plains culture. And buffalo hunting was so important that these tribes would follow the buffalo. So where the buffalo go, the Shoshone would go, or the other Plains people would go. So their land was very pick up and move with the animals, and that's why teepees would be used too, because they're like tents. You can pick it all up and move. It wasn't as cemented into the ground, literally and figuratively. These groups moved. So depicting this buffalo hunt, you're seeing that reflection of that culture there. Unfortunately, by the time Kotsiko was making this, the buffalo hunting had already stopped. So this is more of a look back into the past, because what happened was the Shoshone knew how to, hunt buffalo to not over killing the population, because they would take what they needed. They would use every part of the buffalo. Like, there was a big respect for the animal and its role in the community. However, as Europe moved in, they hunted buffalo to near extinction. So it's been a fight ever since to like bring the buffalo back. And I have some additional slides on that as well. The center of the scene, so kind of you could see the border of buffalo, nice alliteration. In the middle, we do have some sort of ceremony happening. You could see dance through the twisting forms and the kind of concentration on these diagonal lines. The people are a larger scale here. It's not quite hierarchical scale. It's more scale based off of kind of importance. Like, I guess hierarchical scale, you could argue it. Like, the buffalo are not the size of buffalo compared to the people, so they're smaller, but the people themselves are not any bigger or smaller based off of their importance. So you could argue it that way. Subject matter wise, we are looking at this history meets contemporary. So the history is that buffalo hunting, so that's of the past. Contemporary is this dance, this ceremony that we are seeing. It's actually a couple different dances here. One is the sun dance, which I'll get into a little bit more, and the other is the wolf dance, or what becomes known as the grass dance. Sun dance was a sacred ceremony. It was denoted to a sun spirit, a sun god, and then the wolf dance was a non-religious dance, and that's based around like dancing around these poles, and that's where you're seeing these kind of ribbon tassel-y looks between this split pole here, and then also the sun dance. So it's this combo, right? So you see the split pole, the sun dance has this buffalo head. See the buffalo head? It's being hoisted up. This eagle above it is kind of representing that upwards movement. And then men are dancing with feathered war bonnets around the poles. Their bodies are bent. So you're seeing them in motion, and you see the feathers coming off of there, as well as the long feather headdresses down the way. Men were the ones that would participate in the sun dance. It was a social ceremony, and you like fasted to go along with it. It was very, very sacred, very important dance for the people. You also see in bits and pieces, like in this section here, activities of daily life. You saw the teepees, the houses, women are resting near the fire. There's other men on horses. This guy's fixing something here, like, oh man, my chariot broke down, but not a chariot. I don't know why I said chariot, but that's what happened. Anyway, so you're seeing all of these moments. There's people wearing headdresses, they're warriors, there's hunting, there's riding, all these other activities as well. So context. So getting into the artist first, we have Kotsiko. So that's him right there. Again, that European and American name of Katsikoti, that happened a lot with indigenous people, where it's like, I can't pronounce your name, so I'm gonna change your name. Yeah. So that's that. He was known for doing these animal hide paintings. He would do it on deer, on elk, on buffalo, always using the natural pigments, the chalks, the red ochres, etc. His purpose is very like, almost like our contemporary artists' purpose, and it's the idea of affirming his identity. So this native identity, painting these scenes of Shoshone religious or belief systems, of practices, of the daily life, of combining history and contemporary stuff, and showcasing all that positive indigenous feelings through this stylized process of painting, and using elk hide to really ground it back to the use and respect for animals. So it has that purpose. It also has the purpose of selling to tourists. So it's so weird, but indigenous people were not respected as like equals and shunned, and we went over all of that kind of stuff. But by this point, people were curious. It's different. It's not like the things that I have. So indigenous art starts becoming something that people want. They look at ceramics and paintings and weavings and textiles, and they really start taking that and finding a lot of interest in that art. So tourists that would come to this area would want something that looked Native American. So Coatzico is appealing to that. It's making things that people want, showing off, oh, look, the buffalo, and oh, look, here's our sun dance. That's what you expect. So yeah, go ahead, buy it. And then that money would then go back into the reservation and help support the entire community. So it's kind of weird, but it's kind of like a weird, fun little turnaround of like using the prejudice, but it's weird. Deep conversations could be happened about that. And again, I'm not of indigenous background, so I don't want to say too much about one side and the feelings beyond that. But there is an interesting story there. More contextually, men and women both painted on hides. So men are usually producing scenes that were going to be on the teepees, on the clothings, on the shields. Women did other types of paintings. Those scenes would have celebrated battles. It would have been historical, biographical. So their history telling and storytelling goes into paintings that are done on animal hide. So again, that connection to Native identity. This one in particular could have been a wall hanging. Some people have thought of it as a robe. Not quite sure, but it now sits in a museum hanging on a wall. And at this time in which Coatzico was creating the painted elk hide, there was a huge shift for the Shoshone people. Big change. Within his lifetime, that's when the reservation system for the Eastern Shoshone was put into place. There's the Fort Bridger Treaty of 1868, where they're moved to this region, the Wind River, that's denoted as a reservation for Eastern Shoshone. So this is why the reservation system's also really complicated, because it is government sanctioned land for indigenous peoples so that they can exist within a community that is indigenous. There's some tax exemptions, there's some other rules, like there's a lot of different things to like basically create a space for indigenous people. However, that's pushing people out and sequestering them into a specific land that says, okay, this is your playpen and that's what you get. Reservations are a big part of like modern Native culture. There's a lot of positive feelings about like the reservation life, but there's also a lot of negative feelings about it, because it's like the indigenous people had the entire states, and now here's your tiny area of land. Again, I'm not the best to talk about all the nuances there because I've never experienced it, but there is a lot of nuance that goes into that reservation conversation. Just know that it is complicated, and it starts like a good intentioned but not good intentioned icky. This is very weird gray area of history here. When we're looking at that movement, you can see here's kind of like the whole Shoshone people, and then there's different groups within there. So the Wind River area over here, and there's different languages, cultures, practices, all within these plains. areas. And this would have been an oral history group as well. So, reminder of that. They were semi-nomadic. Like I said, they kind of followed where the herds went. And this is where it's interesting, where it's like, oh yeah, look at how much Shoshone land there was, and then push into just this section of Wyoming, which has, such a big population already. But so yeah, reservations have a lot of ick to them. Flipping back to more the positive storytelling, sort of, the Sundance. Sundance, getting into that was what's being depicted here with the buffalo head raising, the eagle flying, all the fun ceremonial stuff there. The Sundance was to honor creator deity, as we see in so many cultures. Sun, important, right? So the sun is often tied to one of the higher up gods. So in the Sundance, they dance, they perform to celebrate that creator deity and thanking for Earth's bounty and making sure that harvests stay good, that hunting still stays good, that the weather is good, that everything works out. So thanking the creator deity for the good year, good time on Earth. So making sure those resources stay good. Very, very sacred ceremony, but it was also seen by a lot of tourists and anthropologists, so there was a bigger interest in the Sundance. Just an intrigue, like, ooh, this very Native American thing, I want to see it. And interesting because there's a ton of people are interested in it, but the US government said, no, that's unacceptable. We can't have you dancing. A little footloose moment here. So they're not allowed to celebrate the Sundance. Forbid it. U.S. government said, no, we're going to push you into this reservation. You can't do your stuff. Not okay. Which, again, what? But it stays outlawed until 1935, 20th century. And the purpose of that is to get the Native Americans, even though they find their art interesting overall, sort of, in a weird way, it's to get people to abandon that culture. Because if you're tied to another culture, you're not tied to this newer government. And you question authority. Not getting too political or anything, but that is the concept, is breaking you off the connection between you and your past. So Cosico, he's putting the Sundance in there, even though at this point it's banned, because people were interested in it. So showing it off, but because it's banned, he also adds the wolf dance to be like, no, I'm just showing it historically, right? Like, it's the thing that you want to see. We're not celebrating it. So it's a little play back and forth between the bending of the rules. More contextual information, just kind of in general. Painting on animal hides was super, super traditional in the entire Great Basin region. So a lot of these plains cultures had the painting. You could see that on the teepee there. And as I said earlier, both men and women did it, and they would show like battles and history, and there would be patterns or figurative work. It's a big part of the culture here is the hide paintings. And animals that were being depicted on it, they're not just doing animal drawings because it's like, oh, I love a buffalo, super cute. It's because they were important culturally. So buffalo are the source of food, horses are used when hunting because buffalo fast, and animals were respected. And it becomes part of that Shoshone identity to also connect between the buffalo and the horses. And really, when they were hunting, it was using every single part of the buffalo, like all of it. So nothing went to waste. You show your appreciation for the animal and for what it gives you by giving it the full respect back. So the Wind River Reservation, as another aspect of the reservation system that is very not okay, is the immense amount of poverty that hits a lot of the regions. It's not supported the same as other areas because it's like, oh no, this is your thing. You figure yourself out. So weird government stuff where they're left to their own devices, but also told what to do and what not to do, and then not supported. So the reservations create this like issue of poverty amongst a lot. Not every reservation, depends location and size and all that kind of stuff. And if the local community works, it's again complicated. But Wind River Reservation in particular was one that was struck by poverty. So Cosico and other artists are trying to do what they can to boost the economy, bring people there, bring tourists there, buy the goods that's made by Shoshone, and then get money back into that reservation, support the reservation, support the community. So it's very like trying, fighting an uphill battle, really, with commodifying yourself and your culture to save your culture. Tricky stuff. And then really more stuff. Buffalo. I mentioned that they were hunted to point of extinction. Again, the Shoshone weren't the ones that did that. It was a lot of the European Americans. They came in. Part of it's like, oh, look, a new giant animal that I can show off my power by killing. But another part is, well, the Shoshone rely on buffalo. So if there's no buffalo, there's no Shoshone. Which is another really dirty, very purposeful tactic of control. So getting rid of the food source for a people just to spite the people and get rid of the people is insane. And then, interesting thing, so talking about like the Sundance being banned and all that. This is way more recent history than it should be, but there's this body of legislation, and it uses Indian as a term that was used to describe Native Americans because of the, oh, I'm Christopher Columbus, and I don't know what India looks like. These must be Indians. And it latched on forever and ever. Not a term used to describe. I know like some government systems still have like American Indian as a denotion for the sect of Native Americans. Some groups use Indian as a term, some do not. I'm gonna not because I've seen more of the not. Anyway, Code of the Indian Offenses was put in 1883 to restrict religious and cultural practices. So, Code of Indian Offenses. The things that they were doing wrong, celebrating their own religion and culture. How could they? That's so offensive. So there were laws put in 1883 to say you're not allowed to be Native, basically. And that lasted until 1978. Like, just about 100 years later, and very recent, President Jimmy Carter was the one that signs the American Indian Religious Freedom Act that said, oh no, you should be able to worship your own religion. That's the right thing. Jimmy Carter just passed away very recently, and he was a real good guy on doing these kind of pushes and moves that feel like should be obvious to let people celebrate their culture and be free to express their religion. And that right there, that freedom of religion, something guaranteed in the Constitution, but not for Native Americans. Funky stuff. So this Painted Elk Hide is a really interesting piece to have this conversation of all that tumultuous relationship between natives and non-natives that exists within America throughout the 1800s and 1900s, showing that reservation system, the traditions, the beauty of painted hide, the beauty of the ceremonies, the horror of that extermination of buffalo, the trying to work hard to keep your culture alive, and all the ups and downs that kind of go with that. So that's Painted Elk Hide. So on to our next artwork. We have the black on black ceramic vessel. This is by Maria and Julian Martinez. Our location here is San Ildefonso Pueblo in New Mexico. Our culture is Tewa Puebloan. Looking about mid 20th century, so think like 1950s era, and our media is blackware ceramic. I love the blackware ceramic that comes out of New Mexico. It starts with Maria and Julian and kind of just has dominated the ceramic like style of the Puebloan people in New Mexico. It's really cool. Connected with people on Facebook that make these type of vessels today. You can find them like on eBay. They're really beautiful, beautiful ceramic works. As a ceramic artist, seeing that black on black, woo, she is gorgeous. It actually showed up as an FRQ last year. So really, really fun, fascinating piece. So when we're looking at the piece, Maria and Julian Martinez are major proponents of pushing the Puebloan culture and celebrating that culture through the use of art, but also supporting the Puebloans financially. So that's going to be part of the context here that really shapes how cool these pieces are. And part of it is that they are signing the bottom of their ceramic, which is a very like modern type of thing for artists to do, is to sign that bottom. Very geometric styles and designs, black on black, but also any of the other ceramic, and even like basket weaving and stuff. Geometry, another very important motif in this region. So there's a close-up image there, so you can see how some of the black has this beautiful shine to it and other parts of the black are matte. So that contrast in texture is really what sells the design of the black on black ceramic ware. Having that shine versus matte lets the designs show off through that use of contrast. So just some quick like vocab related to the visuals. The olla is a rounded pot. So we're looking here at this rounded vessel. So that's an olla. Matte, I use the word a lot. Hopefully you guys know what it means, but it's just that dull kind of texture. And then burnishing. My ceramic people that take the class, we never get to go around and like do a burnishing project. But it's a really fascinating process of getting that nice shiny texture. Some of you may have accidentally burnished your pieces without realizing. But instead of glazing, you polish the ceramic, usually while it's leather hard, and you polish and polish with a stone. Some people use like the back of a metal spoon. It's this polishing while it's leather hard to create this shiny kind of the texture that you see there. So this here is through polishing, it's not through glaze. So real important to understanding how that shine is created. And this black on black style is super innovative for the region and for the Martinezes, with this polychrome technique in which they're not quite like raku firing, but a little bit. They're playing with how the clay is firing. They're using a darker clay, but also firing it in things like manure to create this deep, rich texture. They're using a guaco paint for the matte designs and then the burnishing for the shiny designs. So it is painted, but not in the like glazing sense that you guys are probably used to for those who have done ceramics. The design features on the olla are super decorative, very beautiful geometric work, and the pots themselves very elegant. Creating vases, it looks easy, so hard to get that symmetry. So it's beautifully formed and shaped. The designs are usually a combination of geometry meets organic again, and the designs are based on ancestral Puebloan designs, such as like the Mesa Verde, but also other Puebloans in the region where they saw potsherds. So those pottery shards. So if you think about to the terracotta fragment, that was a potsherd. So looking at the ancestral Pueblans, they see these geometric designs and these features like rain clouds and bird feathers and corn and rivers and these creatures and all those designs, and they're creating those like same designs on modern pottery. So showing off the past and celebrating that past culture, but innovating it with this black on black style. So when we're looking at the full burnishing technique, this is kind of the step-by-step of how these pots were made. Number one is getting the clay. They would resource the clay locally. So clay is that not dirt, but kind of like under dirt, dirt. Not, you know, you're not building sandcastles when you're working with ceramic, but they're harvesting their own clay. And then they're going to mix in grog. Our clay comes with grog already, but grog is clay that's already like been fired, and it's grounded up into little tiny pebbles, and it's mixed usually with like talc and powder and all that kind of stuff to put into the clay. And when it gets fired eventually, then the grog helps keep that structure of the pot stable. It reduces the chance of it exploding, and it just kind of overall helps form the pot and add more stability to it. Once they resource the clay and add the grog, then they start sculpting. With ceramics, you're using water to help form it. Pottery wheel was not used in this formation of these pots. So we're looking at slabs and coils and all of those more hand building techniques. So once they were done sculpting, they would then do the slipware painting technique, in which they would use slip, which is the colored solution, the liquid clay basically, and they're putting the slip on top of the surface. Once the slip is on that, you know, dried clay surface, there they are beginning the burnishing technique of polishing by rubbing that smooth stone over the surface and creating that beautiful shiny finish. Once the pot has become shiny, they're then doing the designs on top of it. So that's where you get that guaco paint, and it's from a plant, so it's a regional variant of paint. So they're putting that on top of the burnishing, and that's why you have the nice clean lines. So it was all shiny, and then they're painting the matte. So thinking about it, they're painting almost like the negative space in some areas. Depends on how you see the design, right? So the matte is what's being painted. Once that design's done, dried, they're then firing the pieces to a really high temperature so that it becomes vitrified and becomes ceramic. And it's not easily broken. It's sturdy, solid, bisque-ware ceramic. And they would use manure to help create the strong heat, because they're not always going to use kilns, like especially the electric kilns or the gas kilns. They do, especially, you know, the 1950s. But the more traditional way of doing it is more the open kilns. Manure is a really good resource for creating a lot of heat because of all the methane gas that's in manure. So we have some poop pots. Manure is a good resource. It doesn't make the ceramic dirty in any way. It fires off. It's all good. So you can still buy your black on blackware pottery and it be totally fine. And the variation of design is really another part of this piece. Because the black on black becomes so popular, a lot of artists are going to follow the Martinez's, what you can see there, and do the same style. So talking about the Martinez's, we have Maria Antonia Montoya, or later Maria Martinez when she gets married. she is one of like the best of the native potters in that 20th century. So really good ceramicist. She also makes connections not just with the natives that she is culturally part of, but she is able to reach a non-native audience. So just like Katsuko of our painted elk hide, who is using native inspired art to help gain money and resources for his tribe, Maria is doing the same thing. So by making these bigger connections and displaying her work and putting her work out into like museums, her goal, not only to bring more awareness to Indigenous art and to her tribe and getting money and stuff, is to make ceramics, and especially native ceramics, into a fine art. Fine art is such a weird term that we're gonna see as we get into like the Royal Art Academy, but art is this beautiful form of expression. There are some like separation throughout time of what is considered fine art, like you put it in a gallery and it's worth millions and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and like functional art, things that you can buy like even today at Target, things that are more made for mass production. Or there's the decorative arts like lamps and couches. They're not going to be shown in a gallery the same way as like an oil painting would. So Maria is pushing for native ceramics to be gallery worthy, which sounds like, well, duh, ceramics is hard. But even when we go to museums as part of the class, there's so few times we see ceramics outside of the context of, oh, look at the old Greek vases. Usually if you're seeing native pottery, you find it at an antique store and you can buy it for like $10. So she's pushing socially in this direction. And pots in general, especially for the Puebloans, they're using ceramic pots for food storage, for cooking, for ceremonies, and they're starting to they use those pots for themselves, but as people are moving westward, the trains that are coming in, the building of the rail line, the pushing of Indigenous people further and further west, more and more people are looking for inexpensive pots, like pack up, move, okay, I just need my cereal bowl, that's all, I'm good, right? But Maria's like, no, my cereal bowl is boring. It's utilitarian. It's everyone can have it. It's mass produced. It's factory, whatever. So why don't we make all parts of our life beautiful? So the pots that we use, the bowls that we use, anything in our life that is functional should also be beautiful. So that's why she's still using the more traditional form of Puebloan pottery, but doing it with this fine art approach, kind of just by saying so. So it's a total reframing. So very activist mindset here. So making it gallery worthy, and she does. So Europeans, Americans, people are looking at her black on black vessels going like, whoa, this is great. Look at the shine. It's so pretty. It's so gorgeous and different. I love it. Put it in a gallery. And in doing so, she is introducing this very native practice to non-natives. She is then able to sell her work at higher prices because it's Maria Martinez's, of course. Her and her husband work together. So she would make the pot because she's the ceramicist, and then he would paint the designs. And he would do it all hand painting and making that perfectly symmetrical. Right? So this is where it becomes even more fun because it's like she's made her name for herself. She signs her name. Her and her husband both sign the name on the bottom. But they get other people in the community to do the same technique. So other husband-wife teams start showing up. They start making, the women are making the pots, the men are painting the designs. And she would sign theirs too. Not as like a way to claim, because she wasn't going to sign her own work at all. Like, she said, oh no, I'm good. I don't need the recognition. I want people to see Native art as art, but I don't need to be the famous artist. So she was very humble. Her and her husband, very humble. I know I'm focusing more on her, but they're both very humble. But when she did sign it in this very American, European fashion of signing your art, then people would more likely buy it. And if people are going to buy it, they're going to buy it at higher prices because, again, it's a Martinez original. So then her and her husband would start signing other people's work because that brings in more money. The money goes back to the community. Everyone's happy and they're able to kind of support that art form, like, and continue it all the way up till today, where other artists, they're signing their own work now, but other artists have continued this black on black tradition. Well, like I said, I'm like friends with someone on Facebook that I just found, like, oh my gosh, you do the black on black pottery. He's like, yeah, add me, we'll talk about it. So it's really cool that even today they continue this tradition. They still sell the works, and Indigenous art is seen as a prized thing, at least here in this context. So if you want to see like the full how to make the black pottery, the black on black pottery, the coil method, the burnishing, all that kind of stuff, you could check that out. Our final piece here is one of my favorites from the Americas. I absolutely adore it. I think this was also an FRQ, like an attribution a few years back. This is the Transformation Mask. We're looking at the northwest coast of Canada as our location. So we have a Canadian. And the culture is Kwakawakawaka. I know my pronunciation isn't perfect. That one's so fun to say, though. I always think of Pac-Man. Waka waka waka, like that. So, Kwakawakawaka. Our date is the late 19th century, so 1800s, end of the 1800s. Media is wood, paint, and string. And you can see that string right here going to the eyeballs. And there are two pictures because this is the same mask. The mask opens up to reveal a human face. And that's the transformation aspect of the transformation mask. So when we are looking at the Kwakawakawaka, they are an indigenous group in the Pacific Northwest. Their traditional territory is on this island, this Vancouver Island. It's not Vancouver the city, it's off the coast a little bit. Beautiful place. I got to go there this last summer and I saw a lot of the indigenous work and the totem poles. And I'll have some examples in the slides. Both the Seattle Art Museum and Vancouver Island's different museums have tons of Kwakawakawaka work. And oh my God, I fell in love. It was so cool. So some background on this group. They are also an oral tradition, and the oral tradition says that their ancestors, also known as the Namima, again pronunciations, they came in the form of animals. So the ancestors were animals and they came by land, by sea, or by underground. So you're going to see a lot of animal motifs in their work, including the transformation mask itself. And the animals were connected to different gods and deities and myths. And we have slightly different animals that we've been seeing because we're now in Canada. So we have the Thunderbird, which is one of the most famous of the spiritual deities in this region. There's the seagull Kolas, the orca, the grizzly bear, and the grizzly bear would have been like the chief ghost. So lots of animal deity figures. The economy was based mostly on fishing here. Vancouver Island and the Pacific Northwest are very kind of fishery regions even today. When I was in Seattle, there's like this big Pike's Place fish market where fish is celebrated even today. Of just people go to the fish market, see the tossing of the fish. So that's really fun. Also, hunting gathering, women would gather fruits, berries, some hunting outside of just fishing, but big fishing kind of market because resource is the Pacific Ocean. So lots of fishing ability there. The art that we see in this region is a lot of super ornate weaving and woodwork that were tied to wealth. They also had these potlatch ceremonies, and these works would be displayed and traded at the potlatch. Potlatch being a ceremonial gathering of people, and notably with their art. And what we're going to look at is this form line style we'll get into. Form line style defines Kwaka Waka Waka work. So what you're seeing, the geometry, the colors, all of that, that's going to be that form line style. Here's our transformation mask. Here's the interior. So you can see there's designs on the inside as well as on the humanoid face. Here's some form line style examples. Very thick, bold lines, curved lines, very clear, distinct colors of the red, the black, the blue, or the white. Here's another mask that would have opened up. So another transformation mask. This one has feathers attached. You can see the string there. There's it open. So see the complex string system on this one goes through the nose because this one has a bottom part too. And you can see how it goes from bird to human. So you're already seeing that idea of the animals tied to the ancestors. So tons of these transformation masks were made with this form line style. Again, bird opens up, humanoid face, more animal motifs on the inside. Here's a photograph of potlatch. So you can see some of the masks on because as we saw in Africa and the Pacific, masks are meant to be part of ceremonies. They're not meant to be displayed in a gallery. They're supposed to be worn. Fun thing with these masks, there's some that are like crazy long, like absolutely insane length. Look at the size of the person, look at the size of the mask, right? So lots of different variety of masks throughout these ceremonies. And then they had totem poles. They were a totem pole culture. So you can see some of that there as well. So here's some of the ones that I got to see. So this was in these ones I believe were the Seattle Art Museum. So even if it's not a transformation mask, you can see that form line style, some weaving of different natural materials. I love this one with the little curvilinear line there, totem pole in the back. There I am. Lots of different examples of that form line style. This one was funky, the upside down person. Wild. I did not read the card. I should have read the card to figure out what was going on with that one. These totem poles are massive, and these are short because I think it's only part. I think these ones might have been like posts for a doorway, actually. All right, getting into some of our vocab. First Nations is a term used to describe Indigenous people, especially in Canada. They use that First Nation term. So it's another one like Native American or Indigenous. First Nations is more specific. When we are looking at the types of gods, in this one, we're going to have a trickster god. In this case, trickster gods are very common across different cultures, but tricksters are denoted with this intelligence and like the secret knowledge, and they use that those smarts to play tricks on people. The form line style, and I'll get into it even more, very northwest coast, very Kwaka Waka Waka. And you can tell because of the ovoids, the U shapes, and the S shapes, and I'll show what that is. And then the Numan or the Namina are the group of fellows of the same kind. That's that term for the common ancestor. So that's that reference back to how the ancestors came in all as animals. Here's some additional transformation masks. All right, into our visuals. So when we are looking at our transformation mask, we see a large, super exaggerated eagle head with a very emphasized beak. So the eagle, very important creature in the Pacific Northwest, very powerful animal, and it's being stylized to show off that power. We have very bright colors, and I know this one's faded quite a lot, so I'll go back to the ones I had. They are very, very vibrant masks. So you can see just kind of the difference that time has taken on ours up here in the corner. But you see lots of reds, yellows, blues. So those beautiful primary colors, the greens usually, and then those deep, dark, like blacks as well. The hair on this was made out of string, so there was string elements as well. And we see a lot, the reason why the paint has faded is because of the change to the synthetic paints and synthetic colors. So this is using natural pigments. That's the mineral base, and then later is going to be the brighter ones using the synthetic. It does open up to show a human face. So the strings would be pulled back and then the face would be revealed. And it also creates the sense of a bird opening and spreading its wings. So it's twofold. So yes, you get the eagle head, but also the flapping open of bird wings when it shows its human face and transforms during the ceremony. This face would have represented an ancestor and would be part of that ceremony. The form line style is bilaterally symmetrical. So if you cut it two ways, it's symmetrical on both sides. It uses U shapes, S shapes, and ovoids or ovals. Lots of wavy calligraphic lines. So these kind of very delicate yet super thick lines. They swell, they contract, they bend, they curve, meaning that you see how this line here, it tapers at the end, gets thick, and then tapers again. So there's a lot of control and purposefulness in these really thick line works and these very simplified shapes. The mask would have been made out of red cedar wood, which is common in the Northwest coast. We have some like redwood trees nearby that would be similar to the cedar, but it creates that nice like orangey texture. Super common, so really easy to work with. I do want you guys on the back of your packets coloring in the form line using the main colors that you see in form line style, but I just wanted to show off what those different shapes are that we're looking at to understand form line style. And you can click on the link where I got this information. So the ovoids are the ovular shapes that we're looking at. And there could be outer and inner ovoids with form lines. And form lines are going to kind of border the different shapes. And they would use different types of lines with that. So the U shape is this, the S shape is that. And they would combine it with other elements. They would cut it with splits, all very purposeful. They're taught to do this type of style. There's relief shapes, so they do negative space work as well. Very, very specific. It's almost like a language in of itself to do these type of line works on the mask. Contextually, Quack Walk Walk are one of many indigenous groups, especially since Vancouver Island is an island. They kind of dominate that region, and then there's tons of other groups along the Pacific Northwest. They were a clan system, so there were the 4 main clans. And I'll have to bring in, I got some cool like artwork, like espresso mugs in the different styles of the clans too. They had the Killer Whale clan, the Eagle clan, Raven, and the Wolf. So those were the main clans. So again, animals playing a huge part in the foundation of ancestral knowledge and indigenous pride. So those clans were divided into those original ancestors, the Numean or the Namima, different words that I'm mispronouncing. But that's why you have these animals. Those were the original ancestors, was the concept. And they were responsible for safeguarding the crest symbols and for conveying the specific rights of the clans. So the crests were important, the ceremonies were important, and the original ancestors were in charge of that to make sure that the clan stays safe and stable and keeps its history alive. So the transformation mass would reference all these different things. They would reference the different clans, whichever clan they were part of. They would have those specific crests, hence why the form line style is important to maintaining consistency amongst the clans. And then the mass would be worn during the potlatch. The potlatch is the ceremony, and it was a ceremony in which there was gift giving, and gifts would be exchanged to everyone in attendance, and whoever was hosting the potlatch would use the mass to display their status, usually a he, right? So to display the status of that individual. So again, we're seeing masks just like thinking back to the Malungan display mask of Melanesia, masks used to display status. During the potlatch was the masks were used in the potlatch in dance. There would have been the full costume. They would have used the mask to help tell the story of the family of whoever was hosting. So the social position of them, the clan, that genealogy. So who are they connecting to, that original ancestor, the crest symbols of the family. So all this historical element being displayed in dance. So they would embody all of the human side of it, as well as the supernatural forces and the animal deities that they're connecting to. And that's why this transformation aspect is so important here. So again, there's that image of the potlatch, and I got to go in a recreated potlatch room where they have these kind of big display boards with this open hole and lots of room for people to sit and watch performances, and it has this beautiful echo to it. So super, super cool experience. Additional context. You see my little thunder lightning gifs that I didn't think about being a little annoying, so I apologize. So the costume of the dancers also included cloaks that were made out of red cedar bark. So we haven't seen that. The use of tree bark as fabric is really fascinating and very Pacific Northwest, especially that red cedar that's common there. The masks themselves, very challenging to make. So they would take months, sometimes years. Again, very similar to like the Malungan display mask. And there would be a lot of attention to these masks to get it right, to show off, because you're not going to make something super sloppy for someone really important. So they would make the masks out of the wood and other organic materials, but because it takes so long, they do have to work smart so that it doesn't decay. So the organic materials kind of go on at the end. So that's why we don't see any in art, or a little bit of string, right? But like the feathers and stuff, those kind of disappear because of decay. There were different carving techniques before colonization, and then the influence of woodworking from colonizers also helped kind of inspire some different choices when they continued to make the transformation masks. A lot of the transformation performances would have involved the trickster gods in the region. So the Thunderbird, super important deity, the Raven, super important deity. They were both tricksters. So they were super smart, but they would be a little playful with it, right? So they're the Loki of our mythology here. The Thunderbird in particular is super common in Kwakwaka'wakw artwork. I have a Thunderbird ornament in the formline style. It's like I got Thunderbird socks. I went a little crazy when I was there. I was a little excited. I was like, oh my God, transformation mask. Anyway, the Thunderbird, thunder connecting to bird, is a concept in a few different regions, but primarily here, where thunder would be caused when the bird would beat its wings and then lightning would shoot out of its eyes. So it was a powerful bird that had these supernatural powers as well. And he would live in the celestial realm, shed his bird skin, and resume human form. So the Thunderbird had an animal and a human aspect to him as well. So we see that being represented in the transformation mask too. So when the transformation masks were done, they would actually be passed down to specific family members within specific clans. So then you're showing that status and your rank through that ancestral practice as well. So the heirlooms show off, look at how far and how powerful my family has always been. So it's really fun, fascinating twist to the other types of masks that we have studied. A little bit more information about the potlatch. Besides just being like a gift-giving feast where these dances were happening, they would also have these giving away or destroying valuable items, which sounds crazy. So you're giving gifts, but you're also ruining them all. Because what shows off more power than taking nice things and destroying them, right? So like if you had, let's say, a Porsche car and you're like, yeah, I got a Porsche, and then you just like set it on fire or dropped it and it crumbled into a million pieces, right? You crash your Porsche on purpose. No one's hurt in this fake scenario I'm crafting. It shows off like, yeah, I'm just gonna buy another one. I'm gonna buy a nicer car. So it shows off power by destroying things too, which is, you know, an interesting approach. But it also, beyond just showing it off, would be like a resource management kind of thing. If you have too much stuff, you're on an island, for one, and for two, you don't want to be overrun by knickknacks and things. It's a, does this spark joy? No, get rid of it kind of moment. So that helps kind of reuse, recycle, and not overwhelm with too much things, but whoever has the things are still important. So it lets like the clan system have good control and power over the people. And it would have been like a super fun ceremony. That would have been music, dancing, singing, storytelling, speeches, jokes, games, all sorts of things that you would see at any party. That would be the potlatch. There was a period of time because Europe and America saying you're not like us, even though, you know, people are people. They said from 1885 to 1950, no potlatches. You're not allowed to have parties because they're immortal and it's cannibalistic. You're eating people at these parties in which you're singing and dancing. Yep, that makes sense. So the masks were confiscated and like literally they were all destroyed or they were sent to museums or in private collections. So if they thought it was nice enough, they would give it to a museum, but most of the masks were destroyed. So things that represented the ancestors and that heritage of the people taken because some crazy rumor of fakeness that they didn't bother to look into because they didn't like that they didn't have power over the quack 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 at potlatches loses history again. So, yay! How dare they party and have a good time. When the ban was lifted in the 1950s, the First Nations tried to get their masks back. So the ones that were in private collections and museums. Is that fully successful? When is it? British Museum moment, right? So luckily the ones that I got to see, I don't know about Seattle, but like when I went to Vancouver Island, it's all in the like promotion of the culture there. So that was good. And potlatches are still part of the Northwest First Nations culture today. So they continue to do their potlatches now that they're not banned and then stupid rumors aren't happening. So transformation masks are back. They're back to celebrating their culture and having a good time. Oh yeah, here's that potlatch room I was talking about. A little hole, a lot of seating, crazy decorative posts, lintel. It was a really cool room. They were playing like music and stuff. Here's some other form line style I saw. Ooh, this one was really fun because it was glass, and then like the clear parts shone through and they like reflected down. So like the matte glass didn't. Yeah, I'm mumbling, but you see, it's fancy. I liked it. It was really cool. Here's some more images of the different masks that I saw and some of the other form line styles. So this was like a full Quack 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 room in Seattle. There's another one of those potlatch artworks, more posts. And then there were totem poles do not, photograph well, but so many totem poles, so tall. Absolutely insane. But this kind of wood carving relief work with that form line style, beautiful. So if you ever get to travel, I highly recommend. If I know at least a couple people have been to Disney World, if you go to Epcot, in the Canada section, they also have a little transformation mask you can poke your head through. Hopefully that's still there. But yeah, so quack, quack, quack. With that, that is all of our artwork from the Americas. We had so many, a lot of really fascinating cultures. And I know I yapped too long, but these are really important, just little snippets at the very nuanced and difficult conversations like around the indigenous culture. So I highly recommend checking out other indigenous works, tribes that we didn't mention, other groups and cultures and different artworks. And there's lots of people like on TikTok and YouTube that show off their indigenous ceremonies and dances and clothes to help just kind of spread that information and show off who they are as the original people of North America. And thanks as always for watching. Make sure you check out the other videos to get all the context for the Americas.